Our next speaker is Tim Carney. Tim is most distinguished as the author of four books, four very successful books, none of which was published by me. And been pursuing him for years, but we'll see. He's still young. Tim is a senior columnist at the Washington Examiner and a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he works on civil society, family, localism, religion in America, economic competition, and electoral politics. So virtually anything you want to talk about, you can strike up a conversation with Tim, and he'll have a professional opinion on it. He was one of four boys, grew up in Westchester County, New York, a graduate of St. John's College in Annapolis. Oh yeah, and here it is, the author of four books. Most recently, almost a year ago, Family Unfriendly, How Our Culture Made Raising Kids Much Harder Than It Needs to Be. That's really such a downer, but because we heard from the Bowles is how, in fact, it's quite easy. But but I'll let Tim explain all that. So he and his wife, Katie, are raising 6 children in Northern Virginia. Tim Carney.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone, for coming here. I remember my first parenting conference and seeing a lot of you in the exact same situation with your first baby, and it makes me realize how we kind of skipped the whole normal age parent thing. We were like the super young people, where people were like carding me if I asked for a drink afterwards, or they thought my wife was a babysitter. And then next thing, you show up at like a Heights parent social, and they're like calling you sir and offering you a chair to sit down in. So. But I do remember, and I want to start with my first day as a parent. This was a little over 18 years ago. And a lot of you remember that day, that moment, very, very clearly. And for me, there's just a few moments that shine through. And I won't go through the ones that involve labor and delivery and all the blood or anything like that. But it was middle of the night. And we were in this overflow wing of Sibley Hospital. And so there was this. I couldn't sleep because, they give my wife a nice comfy bed. Nobody thinks about how hard childbirth is on the men. So they make us sit in this uncomfortable chair, and I'm supposed to sleep, and I can't sleep. Katie's fast asleep, and the baby has been rolled out to this makeshift nursery in this overflow wing of Sibley. And so I'm not able to sleep. I go out there, and I still remember just standing over this little bassinet and staring down at this perfect face and just thinking, what does her future hold? Is she going to have a lot of siblings? What will she look like when she gets older? Can I make her into a Mets fan? As all these thoughts are going through my head, the nurse taps me on the shoulder and says, "Sir, your child is 3 bassinets over. You're just staring at someone else's kid right now." And my point is that we were in the overflow wing with this makeshift nursery because in 2006, Americans had 4.3 million babies, more than ever before. And everybody had babies. You guys remember like the famous celebrity babies? You had Suri Cruise, Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes had a baby. Heidi Klum had a baby. You had Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie had a baby. Britney Spears had a baby. And then that was 2006. Second most births ever in the history of the United States. Next year, everybody gets on the bandwagon following Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, and me. And in 2007, set the record, break the baby boom record. And so we were supposed to have, especially with Britney Spears, all the millennials, bigger generation than Gen X, they're coming into prime family formation years. We're going to have a 21st century baby boom. We, of course, did not. The next year, we had the Great Recession. Number of births fell. Oh, well, maybe it's just temporary. And then the next year, and then the next year, fewer babies, and then fewer babies. We've had basically fewer babies in the United States every single year since 2007. It's been going down. The best measure of birth rate, the total fertility rate, was 2.1. It was just above what demographers call the replacement level, when we started having kids. It's now down to 1.6 in the United States, and it's a lot lower, obviously, in other countries. There are actually fewer children in America today than there were at the last census. Not just as a percentage of the population. There are fewer people under the age of 18. So this high school graduating class will be the peak for the United States. Every high school graduating class for the foreseeable future will be smaller. We've reached peak baby in the United States and in the world. There will be fewer babies born every year unless things turn around. So people always say, why? In fact, there was a podcast that is called Call Her Daddy, where they interviewed the former vice president when she was running for president. And they said, Vice President Harris, most young people think they're going to have kids because they can't afford it. And that's instantly where everybody runs to. I ask people about this, and they immediately run to affordability. In fact, in Family Unfriendly, I tell the story of a neighborhood in Salt Lake City. Utah has a high birth rate. Salt Lake City, it's not as high, and it's falling. And I found this one nice neighborhood that seemed like a perfect place to raise kids. You know, you got normal-size houses. They're not massive McMansions. They're not just apartment buildings. Normal-size houses, a little yard. And I walked around for a couple hours, but it's right near the University of Utah. And I saw 0 families in my hours of walking around until finally I run into this one couple, Isaac and Nicole. And I remember I asked them, I said, so I'm writing about families. Do you guys want to have kids? And the lady just says, no, we don't want kids. And I was thinking, I'm not trying to like sell you any, but then Isaac says, we're never going to have kids. It's just become so much less affordable. I said, what exactly is less affordable? He says, healthcare, well, everything. And then he interrupts himself. He says, but if I'm being honest, it's just that we're selfish. Nicole and I always joke that someone somewhere is watching Teletubbies and cleaning up vomit while we're going to be drinking margaritas in Paris. And my mind, moments later, I'm not joking, a woman comes up pushing a double stroller, and both of the passengers in the stroller were Chihuahuas. So I walk away from this scene, my head reeling, because you have like the Children of Men scene with the Chihuahuas. Because those two explanations, affordability and selfishness are the two most common explanations. Also because why would you go to Paris for margaritas? But on the affordability and selfishness thing, I studied it in the whole time writing this book. And I don't think selfishness has gone up. I think it was 0. Adam and Eve ate the fruit. It went to 100, and it's been flat since then. But the affordability thing I really did study, and it's not that it's false, it's that it's drastically overstated. And one economist, this woman, Angela Rashidi, she put it very well. She said, it definitely feels more unaffordable because with fewer built-in communities to support and encourage parents through the challenges of raising a healthy family, the weakening of our core institutions has likely helped shape evolving views of family life as burdensome, contributing to an overall perception of affordability challenges. That's a way of saying, well, we used to have more things that make parenting easier, and with less of them, with less community support, it becomes harder and more expensive. There's these 2 journalists I know who got married. They're having their first kid, and there's this like sort of Twitter genre, or I guess template, where it's a 2-part tweet. And he said, step 1, research the cost of hiring a night nurse. Step 2, research how to bring about a socialist revolution. The only 2 ways this Washington, D.C. journalist could imagine getting help for him and his wife and his child were the market and the state. Now, that's in some ways a very modern American way to see things. But there's an older way. It was a wise woman put it this way when she said, it takes a village to raise a child. And who knows what she meant. She might have meant the Department of Health and Human Services. But everybody who raises children knows that it's not just what you two can do, and then what you can afford to pay someone else to do, and then what hopefully the government comes in and does. Everybody who raises children knows that they depend on in-laws, they depend on neighbors, They depend on parishes. They depend on institutions, like whether it's an Opus Dei school, a conference. They depend on a local public library, on a Little League coach. And the decline in that, what you had Robert Putnam start to chart in Bowling Alone, that's a huge contributor, I believe, to the falling birth rate. But it's not just birth rates. That's not the only thing. If we just cared about birth rates and nothing else, the best speaker here might be Elon Musk, but he has a different model of family formation than I would advocate. There's an epidemic of childhood anxiety, according to the Surgeon General and the American Academy of Pediatricians. And if you read the newspaper, you know parents being stressed is becoming more universal and understood to be the norm, and in fact, a burden. So what we are lacking is that village it takes to raise a child with less anxiety, to have parents with less stress, and ideally to help people have as many babies as they want and to want more babies than they actually have. I usually don't include that second part because that sounds very unfeminist, but in this room I hope I can say a great America would be one, well, as our vice president said, I want more babies in the United States of America. And that will take strengthening community support. So I write about policy. There is no federal law that can be like the federal, Department of Local Community Cohesion. And when I talk to students, the question is always, what's the big answer? And I always say, there's no one big answer. There's 100,000 little answers. And so some of what I want to talk about, I guess you could call it, how to help build a village. One story I tell in here is from my old parish in Maryland, St. Andrew Apostle. I saw at least 3 families that were also, that were our old friends there. Great parish. We're at a Friday night fish fry. We're talking about how parishes change. Some of the old functions of a parish are being displaced. Youth sports, especially Montgomery County, Fairfax County, the CYO gets replaced by this intensive, expensive travel system. Feeding the poor gets replaced by the government. And so the young priest, Father Bill Wadsworth, he said, so what we're supposed to do is meet the unmet needs. What are the unmet needs of the people in this room? The fish fry there. And so you have like Eritrean immigrants who drive cabs, and you have, inside the Beltway, Washington lobbyists. You've got everything in this room. What do they have in common that they all need? And I paused and I said, we all need a place to bring our children and ignore them while we hang out with other adults. Now, I was young at the time, and so I didn't realize that any time you state, hey, this particular nonprofit entity ought to do X, what you're really doing is, I volunteer to stand up this other organization. And this happened to me, of course, with youth basketball, where I tried to get out of coaching that. And I said, well, I can't, this year I'm really busy, I'm writing a book. And the guy said, what's the book about? It's like, okay. I am now your kindergarten girls basketball coach. But this place to bring your kids and ignore them, we realized we had a little campus. We all got together on Fridays during Lent, and then we stopped getting together during Eastertide. What kind of sense did that make? And so we copied what St. Bernadette's, a neighboring parish, had, which was Friday night on the field. And it was T-ball, kindergarten and first grade, and we got like donation of labor. A guy who is a groundskeeper for University of Maryland, he came and for cost returned the dirt infield into a dirt infield. Pastor scraped together a few donations. I was able to use the school mailing list, the parish mailing list to recruit parents. My recruiting email said, this is just going to be fun. Introduce them to the best sport in the world, which is baseball. This is not supposed to be your child's first step towards a D1 scholarship. The next day, a parent came up to me and said, you mean I already was supposed to take the first step? No, but then I realized part of what was needed was not just a place for them to come, but a low-pressure sports thing that was basically free. And then the way we enticed them, we said, bring your whole family, we'll feed you. And we fed them on donations. That idea of getting people to come for your ministry by feeding them, I got from Jesus with the whole fish thing. And so the softball, the T-ball was basically just an excuse. like it was half of it was to turn helicopter moms into less helicoptery. Like, yes, there's mulch on the bottom of that playground. Your kid might fall off, but they're going to be fine. There's a bunch of other people. There's teenagers there. Come over here, have a semi-legal Miller Lite. And that was a huge part of our goal. Get the people to know each other, get the parent, and that was the comment every year. And then in the fall, other parents started up the same thing with soccer. So building this little place to bring, it didn't exist, but the institution, the parish, jumped to it and did everything they could to make it happen. And then other parents stood up the soccer program and that sort of thing. So at times, you do have to sort of build your own village. But on a day-to-day level, just sort of giving and accepting help, establishing the reciprocity that we need each other. Americans are very self-reliant. This is a virtue. Most of us, our families got here because they got on a boat and left Europe, where nobody crosses against a red crosswalk if you're walking around the streets in Germany. Here, we go west, young man, all that. Individualism, great. We all believe that the nuclear family is the most important institution. And sometimes we take those two things, the individualism and the belief in the nuclear family, and we go and we forget that they rest on the scaffolding of a community of self-reliance. And so, giving help, obviously. So right now, my wife's not here because she's helping set up for a baptism party for a sibling who just had a baby. And I talk in the book about how, anytime a baby's born, my wife is kind of a baby thief, but yeah, so she'll show up and she'll help them, and that's sort of constantly, without asking questions, being there to volunteer, but also not just giving help, accepting help, developing that reciprocity. With a neighbor back in Maryland, we used to do date night babysitting swaps, where I would just go over, or my wife would just go over and babysit. So the two of us would be separated, but that couple would be able to have a date night. And then on Saturday night, we'd switch roles. They're deploying the older kids into this reciprocity is a great thing. It's a great way to give your kids duties, but also to establish this really low stakes, not intensive, very affordable, family-oriented support. There's this family that, again, used to be at St. Andrews and now is at St. James with us. And there was a period where I realized his son was mowing my lawn, which, by the way, I love mowing my lawn, but I realized every time he showed up to mow the lawn, I was on my way to take the kids to the zoo or to the woods. So he was this lawnmower. I was really paying him for fun time with my own kids. But that lawnmower's sister was the piano teacher to my other two kids. And then they were also running the intramural basketball program at the Heights that we were going to. So their older kids were getting the experience of running basically a small business, taking on that responsibility, but they were also being deployed to help us be richer as a family, to have music in our home, for us to do these Saturday outings and me not be stuck doing yard work. Deploying your older kids out into the neighborhood is a great service to everybody else around. On the accepting help, this is something I heard in one of these conferences. If you don't, there's an upside to letting your house be a little bit messy. There are people whose houses I've shown up at, and I just think, do they actually live here? Or is this just like a set? They must have everything in such order. Why can I not do that? And then you realize, no, their house is probably messy, and they just spent all day, screaming at the kids to get it cleaned, or they paid, or something like that. If somebody shows up and your house is a little messy, it probably makes them feel relieved. If there's bikes all over the front lawn, it feels lived in. And so that was something I heard from an Opus Dei mom here about 15 years ago. Establishing a norm that if mom or dad aren't around, any other adult is allowed to scold, reprimand, and if necessary, discipline the kid. This didn't need to used to be said. It used to be that mom would see, when I was working on the book, I talked to a guy who said he was chucking gravel at a dog because he was a stupid 9-year-old boy, and he got screamed at by this lady, and he was trying to cover his face because this lady was going to figure out who he was, call his mom. So he gets back on his bike and tries to race home before this lady tells him mom. But the scolding, that adults have authority to provide correction to other people's kids when, especially if mom and dad is not seeing what's going on. That has to be like explicitly established these days, unfortunately. But so just say it. It'd be like, by the way, you're my kids. If they mess up, you're allowed to inflict any punishment on them you can think. And also putting them to work. Like, boys love it at age like 12. If a guy comes over and he's like, hey, Mr. Carney, how are you? I'm like, you know what? I'm glad that you asked, because that really big rock there needs to get carried. You and Charlie carry it. Charlie never would have carried it, even with his brother. But now his friend gets roped in. His friend's like, oh, this is cool. And that kid might not do any yard work at home, but he's doing yard work at my home. That's, again, part of the norm of reciprocity. A big thing, though, so I spend time in the book talking about how your child, like, this terror of stranger abductions of kids that came up when I was young, and there was a string of high-profile ones, and so people don't want to let their kids wander the neighborhood. First of all, wandering the neighborhood is exactly what kids need. The Americans, the pediatricians, the psychiatrists, they all say childhood anxiety epidemic is caused by the fact that kids are supervised at every minute, that they go from home to school to the coach to home to homework, and they don't just have endless time out there. And so you have to say, your kid is more likely to be struck by lightning while at an organized soccer practice than he is to be abducted by a stranger. But people say, well, the world is more dangerous now. In most ways, it's not. But the way in which it is has to do with tech. If your son ends up at somebody else's house and he has an iPhone, that other boy has a pornography machine. And so the war against kids protecting your children from smartphones, from social media, has to be done by everybody. I remember in 2019, somebody saying, it was Tucker Carlson said, Congress should make it illegal for kids under 18 to have social media. And I said, that's stupid. And they said, what, you think social media is good? I said, no, parents can do this. And somebody said, I tried to, but all my kids' friends had it. And in fact, that was the only way they communicated, was through Instagram Messenger. And so we had to let them get at age 14. And that's when I realized, oh, by chance, all of our oldest daughter's friends don't have social media. Not exactly chance, but it wasn't deliberately planned. Don't have social media or smartphones. So let's make that be something explicit. And so with all the subsequent kids, we would try to get together with their parents and be like, we are not giving our kids smartphones or social media, and you don't have to either, and you might regret it if you do. It hasn't worked in every case, but now that, again, we're like the older parents, that we have a little gravitas, and we say exactly that. And I had a 6th grade dad at Oakcrest just say, thank you. I just thought that I was going to have to get on board with this. But to actually fight and make it be that, whether it's dumb phones where they can, communicate by texting, whether it's no phones, which is what I would prefer, but my kids say then they wouldn't have any ability to communicate, but a dumb phone that's shared starting at 12, a dumb phone that's their own when they start driving, and then, at 18, when they leave the house, you can only control them so much, so you do have to worry about easing them into it. So I'm not an expert on how to handle the tech, but I will say, if you work together with the other parents your kid's age, it's a lot easier to keep your kids doing what you've decided is right for them, rather than what their friends rope them into. So I write a lot about all this stuff, the parenting, the family, the marriage, and I come at it from a fairly conservative, old-fashioned Catholic view, which sometimes gets me attacked as, a misogynist or whatever. The most interesting mean tweets I got, though, was somebody who had clearly read my book and read enough of my tweets to know about me, to attack me as a bad dad because, as he put it, I was forcing the rest of the neighborhood to feed my kids and look after them. And I once tweeted how I knew that my son had already had dinner at a friend's house, but he called home to be like, what time is dinner there? So that he could have double dinner. And the guy wrote back, says, I'm glad other people are stepping up to actually feed your kids. And I got weirder things where people, again, just thought the fact that I would let my kids wander the neighborhood, or that I lost one of my kids in the Marine Corps Museum and let the Marine catch him, that I was somehow externalizing the costs of my children to everybody else. And then I realized that's the mindset. For a lot of people, children are simply a cost to society. And I realized that I see it the opposite way. And at just a quick passage from my book to try to wrap this up. So this is, again, about right before we moved across the river in 2022. My last service for St. Andrew was moderating for the small synod group we had there, actually. I sat at a table for a couple hours with co-parishioners, mostly old ladies I knew a little bit, but not a lot. The topic was communal connection within the parish. At one point, one church lady addressing me referred to, quote, what you bring to the parish. I assumed she was talking about the T-ball or Sunday school instruction or some other volunteering by Katie, but this wasn't what she meant at all. What you bring to the parish, she said, your children in the school, your sons serving at Mass, your daughter reading, taking 6 kids to Mass every Sunday. That is, in her eyes, this church lady, what we brought was bodies. We brought souls. We put 8 butts in the pews on Sunday, brought 8 customers to each fish fry, and generally filled the halls and fields of St. Andrews with human beings. If the Carney showed up, it was an instant quorum. On the final week of school one year, Mrs. Anastasi, who was this great preschool teacher, Mrs. Anastasi emailed parents informing us she would miss the last day. We had first come to the school in part so that she could teach us. She taught Charlie, Brendan, Meg, Sean, and then finally Eve. We owed Mrs. Anastasi the grandest of all last day of school teacher presents, but with her early start to summer vacation, we didn't have time to get anything. And so on the next morning, her last day teaching a Carney kid, I brought her the only thing I could. I brought my kids. Mrs. Anastasi opened the door at 7:35 to the gift of Eve, Sean, Meg, Brendan, and Charlie, all beaming. She cried and hugged my crew, her crew. It's common to mock parents for believing their child is God's gift to the world. But very literally, children are God's gifts to us. My children are gifts to others, not because my children are special, but because my children are children. So this is where you see I try to smuggle in some Christian anthropology into this, but I think it really matters. I think the view in the rest of the world is that not just that children aren't good, but that's a reflection of believing that we aren't good. And it's easy to think that, especially if you're hearing about climate or racial injustice or whatever. It's easy to see that when you don't know or trust your neighbors, when you think every stranger might be an abductor. When you're not getting help, you're not asking for help, you're not giving help, it's easier to develop that dark view of humanity. And I think that's one of the big problems. And so somehow planting in people's minds the opposite view, the goodness of humanity, that we are fallen, but we're good, that view of the human individual that the Catholic Church teaches, Christian anthropology, that's one of the ways that you can spread and help build the village beyond just your friends and to the broader world. So on that note, I want to thank you guys all very much. And I'll take questions, because I'm a little early, so yes. So questions, arguments, you want to argue about travel sports or? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, what could I have drawn from the European experience? So it's really tricky, and that's why I ended the book on sort of the sadness and the belief in goodness, because I think some of our cultural problems, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, in different ways, have different cultural problems. So for us, the cost of owning a home really is a deterrent to family formation in the United States. While I think in Spain, for instance, it's more normal to live in an apartment building with like 3 kids, while here people are like, no, I got to get out of the apartment if I want kids. I think the workism That's a real problem here, where people are married to their jobs, and that doesn't allow them to have kids. That's the only place they get meaning from. That's not as present in the, to not stereotype too much, but in the Mediterranean Catholic countries of Europe. Catholic work ethic is not a phrase. So they don't have that problem, but they do have a sort of sadness. But so a lot of these countries are trying to respond. Hungary, for instance, has done a whole suite of things to try to help the birth rate. They've had middling success. Basically, what they've been able to do is found, in my opinion, is if you give a ton of money to people, especially people having their third or fourth kid, no taxes after 4 kids or something, what you do is you help the small minority of the population that is religious and very pro-family, but constrained and lives in a small apartment. You can help them get a bigger house and a bigger car, and then them have their third and fourth kid. I don't think Hungary has successfully moved anybody from 0 to 1 kids, but I think they successfully moved people from 2 to 3. That's not really going to show up in the big numbers in the long run. The big country, though, it's not Europe, but it's the whole middle chapter of my book, basically, is Israel. Israel has a birth rate of 3.0, which is twice the European average, almost twice the U.S. average, by far the highest birth rate of any rich country. Yes, religious Muslims and religious Jews have higher birth rates than average. Secular Jews in Israel have a birth rate of 2.0. That is, if all the secular Jews from Israel moved to the U.S., they would drive up the birth rate. Secular Americans are below 1, I think, in their birth rates. So the religion does trickle out. That's sort of why I believe that people like the people in this room, by sort of just being openly pro-kid, like sharing your children with the rest of the world, even if you get some mean tweets about it, that really can make the whole thing spread. Pregnancy is contagious is one of the phrases I put in this book. And so in Tel Aviv, I was interviewing a guy, and it was this really nice place. It was right outside of basically a kindergarten, and there's a bunch of people hanging out at about pickup time. And one guy was like, so I'm writing about birth rate in Israel. Why is it so high? And he goes, oh yeah, it's horrible. And he points from like Tel Aviv towards Jerusalem. He says, all the religious people over there, they have so many babies. It's horrible. And he's doing this while he's kicking a soccer ball back and forth with his 4-year-old son. And in the middle of his tirade against people having too many babies, his wife walks up and hands him their 2-year-old. And they're all really young. I'm like, what an amazing country. The antenatal people here have 2 or more kids. And so Israel doesn't have a massive, expansive social welfare state in the way that Hungary and France really do. Hungary and France have some success. The cultural pathologies, the cultural virtues are different in different places. But Israel's the only country I know of that has done that on a nationwide level, sort of spread the idea like, bring us your kids. We'll take care of them. Bring them out to the nice restaurant. Let them walk to the corner and get on the bus by themselves. We'll take care of them. Yes?
Hi, I'm an architect in DC. I recently graduated from Notre Dame, where there's a strong emphasis on traditional urbanism. And we just moved into Old Town Alexandria, where it's very walkable, kind of a small town vibe. And there's a growing Catholic community there. I'm just curious if you've ever kind of thought about urbanism and town building as it's related to community building, because in my mind, there's a lot of controversy about this recently, but the kind of small town walkable urbanism that's common in European culture is actually very conducive to building a much closer community.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm curious if you have any thoughts on whether or not promoting something like that can actually help encourage a strong Catholic community.
I'm really glad you brought that up. I mean, I hope it can help. If Italy and Spain have a lot of really walkable neighborhoods, that doesn't show a high correlation between walkable neighborhoods and birth rate. But you've got to imagine, as every parent here has experienced, the whole car thing, that your children can't get anywhere without a car. And so when they're teenagers, their social life is totally dependent on you, and that's annoying. When they're little, though, and you have to go to more than one place, it means you don't just have to buckle and unbuckle. You buckle, unbuckle, rebuckle, and then on the little ones, there's that sort of fifth point on the 5-point harnessing, and you have to dig your hands into this like slurry of chewed up goldfish and butt sweat. And it's thoroughly unpleasant. It makes you stay in your house and get depressed and get on Twitter. And so the kid walkability, it was a key that when I talk about some suburbs outside of Salt Lake City, the parents all still have to drive into work. And there's not a cocktail bar to walk to like most of the urbanists write about. If you guys read Urbanism or Yimbies, they have all these great ideas, and then they're like, and this is the most beautiful building in the world, and it's some like German monstrosity that looks like a prison, but and they don't talk about kids. So like urbanists who care about kids is absolutely what we need. Chapter 3 of my book, again, believing that the built environment can affect the birth rate. The title of chapter 3 is, if you want fecundity in the sheets, you need walkability in the streets. And so housing, sidewalks, parks, kids just able to get around. And so one of the pieces of advice I pulled from this talk, because in some ways it's annoying, because we tried to follow this for years and we just couldn't afford it and find a house. But it's, if you can, move close to your brothers and sisters and your friends who are having kids. And we, through a miracle, were able to do it shortly after the book came out, and it's life-changing. It's great. But also, there's no sidewalks. And it's like, come on, Fairfax County. I know that I'm paying lower taxes here than I was back in Montgomery County, but I'd pony up for a sidewalk, I think. And so I think it's absolutely important. A lot of conservatives don't like it because either they think the word urbanism means everybody's telling them they have to move to Brooklyn or to Petworth, but also they're afraid somebody's going to take away their car. The word 15-minute city, I started using that positively in my book, and then I found that for a lot of people, they think it's a conspiracy theory to be like a Chinese communist labor camp where you're not allowed to go outside of a 15-minute. No, kids should be the main reason that we want walkability, so that you can go out and say, all right, Sean, come home when the streetlights turn on. If you're Gen X, that's how you grew up in America. Come home when the streetlights come on. You better be home for dinner, even if it's your second dinner. And you're free between now and then. So obviously safety and being tough on crime is part of it. The tech stuff is an added worry. But frankly, a lot of suburbs just are only built for cars, and that's really corrosive of family. So thanks for bringing that up. And if that's all, thank you guys very much.